Contrary to the slide on screen, I'm not Jordan Mitchell. My name is Gai Leroy and I'm the CEO of the IAB here in Australia. So welcome to the IAB Tech Lab Project Rearc webinar for our region, which also coincide with our first local IAB Australia weekly webinar. So this is an exciting kickoff for us. Like many of you, we're switching all our events to virtual events, so bear with us while we sort of manage all your questions and information. But during this time, the IAB in Australia will be doing more in the education space, more in the webinar space, trying to keep everyone informed and up to date and keep our industry moving forward. And we'll also be doing this for members and non-members and opening that up during this period. So most of the participants in this call today will be from Australia, but we do have many others joining from around the region, and the content's suitable for all. So welcome to people from around our region. So what is Project Rearc? So apart from a clever name, it can be a slightly awkward name, and others can find it a little bit tricky to pronounce. But Rearc, if you think about it as re-architecture, re-architecting the digital advertising supply chain. This project was announced earlier in the year at the IAB annual leadership meeting. And the project's to drive overarching change in the way we approach digital marketing, with the aim really to harmonise personalisation, privacy and community. Throughout your national IABs and our global tech standards body, which is IAB Tech Lab, we've begun to review and develop approaches to support the industry and manage consumer privacy, safety, identity, and other needs in this post-cookie digital marketing supply chain. The work is and has a need to be a collaborative effort across all sides of the industry. So marketers, agencies, publishers, and everyone in between. In Australia, we're very lucky to have a very close working relationship with Tech Lab, and we are thrilled to have Jordan Mitchell, who's the SVP of Identity, Data and Privacy, presenting the webinar, the bulk of the webinar today. And he's going to look specifically at the end of third-party cookies, why they're going away, what's the impact, and more importantly, what we do now. We're going to get a bit of a history lesson as well today, which is really important in terms of understanding where we are, why we're where we're at today, and how we build a better future and not fall into any of the same areas that may be challenging us today. We need to build technical solutions and frameworks that help our industry operate while always focused, and I can't emphasize this enough, on the consumer experience and consumer consent at the forefront. The Tech Lab team have worked directly on building solutions that help enable our industry to operate in different regulatory environments. For the Australian market, we still don't have a firm timeline on privacy regulation review. So all the solutions that we're looking to build, will be agile enough to hopefully suit global needs. That's front and foremost in what we're trying to build. So in a moment, I'll hand over to Jordan, who will do about a 40 to 45 minute presentation. Then we're going to be open to questions. So feel free to pop a question in the Q&A box down the bottom. We'll get to as many as we can. For the Q&A session, it's going to be facilitated by the one and only Jonas Yanamaji, who most of you will know, who's the IAB Australia Tech Lab and Tech Lead. So he will help sort of allocate questions to the appropriate people and also, I guess, follow up locally with any outstanding questions. Jordan will also go through, and as will JJ, ways that you guys can keep involved and be involved, because really this is a joint project and a collaborative project, and we really need to all be, and I won't use leaning in, people can slap me over the webinar, but really involved and helping to drive the solutions that suit the industry and help us to keep growing. So over to you, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Gai. Very much appreciate it. And let's jump right into it. I'm coming to you from Seattle, Washington area, where it's still April 1st, Wednesday. But good morning to the rest of you. And I think Gai kicked it off quite well with a history lesson. It's really important that we fill in some of the information and level set our industry globally on just how much of an impact and how much of a crack in the foundation this goes with the removal of third-party cookies and identifiers. First, just real briefly about Tech Lab. We are a global organization. We're fortunate to work with quite a few of the IABs globally, and we really focus on the technical layer, building the tech standards, engaging with the technology community from across the world to develop the right standards and guidelines and programs that establish and grow trust in the digital media ecosystem. So technical standards are something we all rely on every single day. As consumers, we can connect anywhere through Wi-Fi and through USB or through Bluetooth. And tech standards are similar, but they're for digital media. They're for supporting the transactional nature of how our ecosystem trades with each other. And we, through our work, which is technical specifications, guidelines, we actually write software and do some services, including compliance programs as well. We focus on identity, data and privacy, brand safety and ad fraud, ad experiences and measurement, and programmatic effectiveness as general themes. And as I said, tech standards are global. HTTP and the standards that are supported by browsers and the mobile app ecosystem, those are global. So are Tech Lab standards. And we work with 42 of the 47 local and regional IABs globally. Over 750 companies are also direct members of Tech Lab. And we have over 30 technical focused working groups with over 2,000 technologists, distinct technologists who contribute to those. And the story I'm going to tell is around the foundation of where we are today through 5 simple evolutionary stages. And the point here is that we really need to rethink a new architecture. We've appreciated as consumers tremendous innovations in the internet over the last 25 or so years. However, the evolution of identity and privacy as underpinnings of the development of the web and of the internet itself has not evolved with the same wonderful degree. And so the punchline here is that we're in these states of, we're in these crises of privacy and data, and it's a result of the core open architecture of the internet that resulted in this tremendous innovation that built these wonderful this content and services and the conveniences that we have as consumers. And it's a result of privacy and identity not being built into this foundation and the resulting fragmentation of consumer identity, data, and privacy settings. And we have to rethink this and re-architect around new tech standards, rethinking all the core use cases that are supported in this new privacy by default world of advertising, while ensuring responsible use of consumer-provided data, consumer transparency, choice, and control, and to Gay's point, really focusing on consumer experience and improving industry accountability and trust. There's never been a more pivotal and more important point in the development of our ecosystem to focus on that. So first, within the birth of the internet, of course, that was really a focus on a complete shift in how software was written. The architecture and vision of the internet was really moving from a proprietary client-server world to an open architecture. And a good example of that is the Zoom experience that we're all in right now. We have the option to download the software on our devices or run it within an app, or we can connect through a browser. And the browser is, of course, an open and standardized client where we can connect to all kinds of different things from within that single browser. Our own software systems that we use within our companies, third-party systems and UIs, websites, including this very webinar. Now, in the olden days, everything was client-server. We had to download everything, run this locally on our devices. They use proprietary communications, connecting to a proprietary server with proprietary logins with each one of these. Well, the internet changed everything. Everything was open, an open server, open communications layer. And this really enabled any person to share any information with anyone at any time. And you can see what a tremendous impact it's had. The focus was on open, ubiquitous standards. And the most prominent, of course, was the HTTP, the Hypertext Transport Protocol, where the free web browsers made HTTP requests, and this happens today still. An HTTP request with largely the same information that was done 20 years ago. And the web servers responded with all of the data, the images, the videos, the text files, and that was pieced together to show you a completed web page or an application within our browser. Largely the same standards and architecture that continue in use today. But back in about 1994, they realized there's just one problem. The internet and HTTP was designed with no state. There was no login or any way to distinguish one request or individual from another, and that was state. There was no connection that persisted between client and server. So in the world of software, it was kind of like us talking to a room full of people with no name tags. They all sound the same. They all look the same. They're all talking at once about different things. It was really difficult, if you're listening to all this, to make sense of it all. And this is how it was for web servers who were trying to develop convenient services and simple features. So the HTTP cookie was invented to solve this, and it was really a way for the server, in a response to a web request, an HTTP request, to jot down in a, like think of it as a little name tag, an arbitrary value to that name tag would it put on the browser. And every time that server saw that browser, that name tag was provided back to it, so it could distinguish one user from another. And this simple mechanism resulted in some of the key things we have today: basic website analytics, basic reach and frequency measurement for ads, but with some unintended consequences that continued to, well, pretty much spiral out of control. Thousands and thousands of cookies, because every cookie could only be read by the server that set it. Now you had every company having to set their own name tags for every different device, login, etc. There was no common identifier or name tag provided to all parties. So our browsers started to look like this, multiplied by 10 orders of magnitude. We all have all of these cookies for every different first party that we visit, a publisher or brand that we visit, and every third party that they employ within to provide their personalized services. So to recap, the original architecture of the internet did not standardize consumer identity or privacy, and still doesn't. Cookies were and remain the sole mechanism for distinguishing each user. And a cookie can only be read by the party that set it. And this started off with some of the features that continue today. Now let's move forward a little bit into the age of personalization and e-commerce. And this is Time Magazine's Person of the Year. At one point, I seem to recall it was maybe 1998. I can't read that real well. But this is Jeff Bezos from Amazon. And there are many examples locally that represent these new consumer expectations that started to be developed. And what they did was, and what many others like them did is, well, if you like this product, you may also like this. Others looking at this item eventually bought this. And it was convenient. And without HTTP cookies, this was not possible then, and it was not possible, it's still not possible today. So as what happens with all innovation, one or two companies starts out with that, and then other companies think this is pretty darn neat, and we'd like to do this ourselves. So they either have to build this themselves using their own software development teams, or oftentimes third parties will offer that feature and say, hey, we can integrate with your website or within your application and offer this so that you can offer this feature as well. Well, this started third-party vendor ecosystem within the internet, and each one that you added another cookie to the consumer's browser, because again, there was no other way to distinguish the consumer, and there was no other way than the cookie than to integrate and offer these personalized experiences. So again, to recap, the architecture of the internet did not standardize consumer identity or privacy. Still doesn't. Cookies were and remain the sole mechanism for distinguishing each consumer. And a cookie may only be read by the party that sets it. And now we have more innovation on the model of cookies and cookie-based identifiers with e-commerce personalized experiences, and now third parties coming in to offer some of these features. Then we move into a whole new era where we call it the era of user-generated content. And the internet became primarily around what we as consumers contributed. User-generated content exceeded business-generated content over the internet for the first time. It was the videos we uploaded, the images, the reviews we offered on different restaurants and vendors that we had, the blogs that we proffered and the comments that we offered as well. It began the unprecedented sharing of personal data, feelings, opinions, all these different things, all this behavioral data and this sentiment within our industry began to grow pretty massively. And these first services really didn't have a revenue model. It was all free, and they hoped that it would be funded by this personalized advertising. Well, these services expanded pretty dramatically, and they still are ubiquitous. And websites either, again, had to build the features themselves, or they used third-party vendors. And every new vendor that started up added yet another cookie to the consumer's browser, because there was no other way to distinguish consumers, no other way to integrate and offer these experiences. And again, to recap, the architecture of the internet still had not standardized consumer identity or privacy. Cookies remained the sole mechanism for distinguishing each user and the only mechanism, and they could only be read by any individual party that said it. There was no standardized identifier. There still isn't. And it enabled innovation, though, important innovation, though, in the development of the internet. Now we get into the social web, the age of social. And this is Mark Zuckerberg as another person of the year. And this is where not only with Facebook, but also LinkedIn and Twitter, the internet as a social mechanism went mainstream and continues to be an important part of many of our lives, where we explicitly developed our friends online, those connections and those sharing of interests and our location and the content and our feelings and our images with these same groups of people. And social sharing still is pervasive. Also at this time, we started to see the proliferation of personal internet-connected devices, starting roughly with the iPhone and just continuing from there. More devices, more behavioral data collection, and more free services funded by personalized advertising. As a result, we started to see a new model for marketers really gain credibility and reach en masse. Our advertisers started targeting people and not pages because of the vast personal data that we really provided as consumers and the the habit of marketers, they really appreciated being able to reach specific audiences. It was intensely beneficial for them because they could reduce the media waste. And the same personalized experiences that we expected as consumers, we started to see as not just personalized experiences, but personalized advertising as well. And the large first parties, the largest first parties, and it's not just these folks, every different region has their own case studies of these important large first parties developing very proprietary data models and having a real corner in the market in these areas. They built in-house systems to support their growth. Everyone else used third-party vendors in order to compete and brought in these vendors to offer these features. And for the first time, we started to see the privacy programs develop to allow consumers, us as consumers, to opt out of this behavioral advertising. This was tied to a cookie because still, there was no other way. And you guessed it, more and more and more cookies. More third parties working on behalf of the publisher or advertiser to provide those rich experiences. And every new third party that you added to the ecosystem added yet another cookie. There was no other way. Except for the mobile app ecosystem, where first with iOS and then Android, they changed the system so that there wasn't a dependency on HTTP cookies. They were working within a proprietary OS, within proprietary apps. They still had cookies supported within the open browser environments, but within the app ecosystem that they proliferated, they provided those apps, all those parties, with the same proprietary device ID, the advertising ID, and they operated in those closed environments using this app ID. And that was very beneficial because everyone got the same, well, back to the, they got the same name tag. And to recap, this era, the architecture of the internet still had not evolved to standardize consumer identity or data or privacy, and still doesn't. Cookies were the only mechanism, which remains for distinguishing a consumer on the web, and the cookie can still only be read by the party that sets it. We still saw a lot of intense innovation and the development of wonderful new conveniences and experiences for us as consumers, including consumer privacy settings and opt-out programs globally, and with a slight variation within the mobile app space. They would provide their own device ID and different consumer privacy settings tied to that device ID. And now we get to the last decade, which has really been the age of the growth of marketing and automation, where the machines and algorithms really took over how brands and publishers connected with consumers around advertising. And what we saw was manual processes being replaced by software and algorithms, the development of many different platforms working in the middle, and auction systems connecting advertisers and tech platforms with billions of the data points that now existed within our ecosystem, fueled by all these personalized services. And now, like every ad we see today is as a result of this multi-step system where I call up an app or a website page that makes a request of a selling platform, which makes an auction to a bidding platform or a buying platform where advertisers have their campaigns booked looking for specific audiences. They're looking for exactly the audiences that they want to bid against. Those are then passed through the ecosystem, and sometimes multiple auction clearing mechanisms are utilized to finally, within typically about 50 milliseconds, the ad that I see as a consumer. Now, this is a simplified view of this supply chain that has formed over the last decade to automate all of these processes on behalf of advertisers and publishers. But the important part is that since each cookie can only be read by any given party, every single party had to use their own proprietary cookie-based user ID to recognize those audiences. And in real-time systems, when everyone is referring to the user as a different identifier of some sort, well, that presents a problem. Now we have way more platforms, way more cookies, all of them having to utilize a mechanism called ID syncs or pixel syncs to share those user IDs in order to work together to facilitate the delivery or the auctioning of those bid requests, those opportunities to connect an advertiser with a consumer. And the result is hundreds of billions of pixels showing up within our ecosystem every single day, flowing the publisher pages. Now, I want to lean into this a little bit more and describe, like, what is this ID, this pixel sync? Now, you recall that only a server can read the cookie that it set. So if I'm ID 123 for one platform and I'm ID 456 for another platform, if those two need to work together in real time to facilitate an advert or personalized content, then we both need to understand who we're referring to. And the ID sync allows parties to communicate between each other that says, and they do this through these mapping tables. And it's essentially every time that one party lands on the page where I as a consumer just went, they use that opportunity within that page load to say, hey, partner, and they can do it like up to 10 or 15 times for different partners. In that one time, they send a request out to their partners that basically amounts to, hey, here's my ID for this user. Please reply to my server with your own ID and I'll update my mapping table. So the next time I see this user, I can say, hey, do you want to bid on user ID 456? And to give you an idea of how this has resulted in exponential growth of third-party requests or tracking requests on all the pages that we go to, just 4 parties working together necessitates 12 ID sync pixels or requests on a page for each of my devices or logins or apps. If there's 8 parties behind the scenes, just doubling of the parties, you more than quadruple the number of requests. That's 56 ID sync pixels for each of these. We have hundreds and hundreds of third-party platforms syncing together today within our ecosystem globally. And this is what the regulators see. This is what the browsers and the privacy advocates see. All these parties in the status bar, every time I go to a page on the web, my favorite website, I see all these things loading and slowing down the page. And it's this causing this level of anxiety within the regulatory environment and within the browser environments, within consumer advocacy groups. And this is the way that cookies were designed, and the way that we've evolved as an ecosystem. We're still working within the same basic architecture where we did not standardize identity or privacy, and still don't. And the cookies can only be read by the party that set it. Yet those cookies and those cookie-based identifiers have enabled all the innovation over the last 26 years, including all the advertising use cases and marketing automation, etc. So here's where we are today in this age of privacy that brings us to today. The current situation that we're in is that we have hundreds and hundreds of different third-party platforms that work on behalf of publishers, that work on behalf of marketers to connect advertisers and publishers, and each of them are setting their own cookies and synchronizing, creating billions of these redundant trackers to connect all these different IDs. The data collection that's involved here is opaque. It's not very transparent to the consumers in terms of what's being shared and collected and used. And as consumers, it feels like we have very fragmented control over all of this, what's happening, all this data collection. And this is only getting worse. We're in this perfect storm where all these factors are increasing and feeding upon each other. More and more and more connected devices, each of which have some sort of identifier and some sort of data collection. The scale of data collection is expanding, and the sharing and the use and the potential for misuse. The ability for the machines, through machine learning and other mechanisms, to make sense of unstructured pieces of data and tie those together has expanded, and those capabilities have expanded. Our expectations as consumers around privacy and transparency control have heightened. The regulation that we're all subject to as companies and as trade organizations supporting companies, that is escalating rapidly. And now the blocking of third-party cookies, and we think soon mobile device identifiers as well, by browsers, operating systems, add-ons, etc. So we're in this place where all of the systems that power all the use cases that fuel our whole advertising ecosystem are based on the proliferation of identifiers and addressability of some way, shape, or form. Yet, starting 2 years ago, starting with Safari and their intelligent tracking protection, and accelerating much more rapidly in the last 6 to 8 months, all of the browsers and the operating systems have begun to focus on how do we reduce all of the behavioral data collection at scale, all of the behavioral breadcrumbs that can exist across different sites and apps. That is what's at being targeted and being focused on by the browsers, most recently with Google Chrome, where fortunately for us, instead of them just turning it off, they gave within 2-year time horizon. So they lit a rather long fuse to a rather large explosion of impact to our ecosystem. And we have to respond now. Realistically, we don't have a lot of time. We have to recognize that the systems that we all rely on, the third-party platforms that we rely on, all the 3-letter acronyms that we rely on, all of the in-house systems that we build, not only supporting marketing efforts, but privacy efforts. All of those systems have a dependency on cookies and cookie-based identifiers and all forms of identifiers. And it doesn't work when you just remove identifiers. So we have to retool all of these systems for different ways. And the first thing is recognizing that it's between consumers and the first parties that they trust now, the publishers and the brands that they trust now. And we have to recognize that consumers have different tolerance levels of privacy versus personalization on this continuum. We all know those who don't want to be tracked at all, and we have to respect that. We all know those who really lean into all of the conveniences that our companies offer, personalized advertising and services. And then we all know those that want a balance, whether they set it or not and want to really understand and fiddle with the switches and dials. They want to know that they have those dials where they can tune their own preferences of privacy versus personalization. So Rearc is really how do we re-architect digital marketing to harmonize privacy, personalization, and community. Well, we really need to engage stakeholders across the industry globally. The browser actions and the operating systems, those actions are not regional in nature. Whereas policy and regulatory actions are regional in nature, the browsers are doing things that run globally because like Wi-Fi, like Bluetooth, like HTTP, like RTB, these are all global tech standards. And so we really need to focus on tech standards and guidelines as components to fuel for alternatives to third-party cookies, so that we can together continue to feel a robust open web for the next 26 years, as in the past 26 years. We want to nurture this innovation that also innovation around consumer transparency, choice, and control that is respectful, that it really is built on these explicit trusted relationships with first parties and the consumers, but also their trusted third parties. We also want to focus on open standards that are interoperable and improve industry accountability and trust. To be clear, we don't see a simple fix here of having a universal ID or a standardized ID, either supported by browsers and provided by our ecosystem, or provided by browsers or mobile operating systems, or any operating systems. We think it's very clear that they're looking to remove identifiers that can traverse multiple sites and apps, and remove that entirely. So we don't think that that's going to work for us to continue to build around that, but there are things that we can do around identifiers. We have to recognize that if we're focused on new addressability standards for this new world, the old world we're moving from this world where everyone had some addressability, all third parties and first parties, and so we're basically in a tracking by default world. We have to recognize that this new world is eliminating all third-party tracking by default. So where absent anything I do as a consumer, I'm guaranteed that only the party that I went to explicitly is able to do something, is able to understand and set a cookie of some sort, or have access to an identifier. And they're under obligations around disclosures generally, and that's another factor here. From a regulatory front, is they're often going to be under obligations of consent around the use of my personal data as well. We have options, though, as an ecosystem that we're looking at, shifting the definition of audiences and the targeting and the measurement of audiences on device instead of in the servers. These are things that are being proposed. You've heard of Privacy Sandbox, perhaps, from Chrome. These are some important proposals very early on in their development, but these are things that we're looking at, and it just really focuses on audience cohorts. Still, no individual addressability of consumers or devices, but the ability through on-device algorithms to still single out different audiences while maintaining privacy of any individual within those audiences. Now, third parties going forward it's going to be very blurry to this distinctiveness of one user from another. But first parties will still have capabilities, and so for advertisers who want to work with first parties, there will still be for them to target specific audiences based on context of the site, of the app, or of the page, or first-party behavioral segmentation. Working through the first parties, there are still opportunities to narrowly target specific audiences, not only with your large local newspapers, but also through the obvious large first parties as well. Will still benefit from their audiences that they have And additionally, we're seeing the rise of authentication events for consumers, both from brands as well as different publishers are asking for a login, or asking for a subscription, or asking for an email to authenticate users. And so there will be opportunities going forward to connect trusted brands and trusted publishers. And we'll talk about that more in just a moment. For us to enable all of this, this really focuses on the right levels of tech standards and guidelines to both enable this privacy by default world, but allow our industry to operate responsibly. And so for our role with Tech Lab, working with all of the local organizations globally, is to focus on a lot of these tech standards, utilizing your inputs. We are working with the browsers directly. We're engaging within the standards groups that run the standards that the browsers well, we hope that they will continue to respect going forward. We really want to encourage cross-platform interoperability in standards. So just as it would be horrible if all the different hardware manufacturers decided to fracture Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and none of our connections, all of that started to fragment, that would be horrible experiences for us as consumers. We want to make sure that the browsers all operate roughly the same way, because that encourages innovation, both within the advertising ecosystem, but outside the advertising ecosystem as well. And on the contextual and first-party behavioral front, we offer standardized taxonomies that can allow scale and targeting. If everyone describes their audiences the same way, this offers the advertisers scale in reaching those audiences. And we can work with all parties to establish best practices in utilizing that. Accountability is going to be very important. In this new world, the strength of our approach is only as strong as its weakest component. So we all have to come together to make sure that all of the platforms are operating responsibly, and we can call out those that are the weak link in the chain. On the consumer side of things, with authentication, it's important to be able to bring standards in that really leverage the trust that first parties have with their consumers, and provide them with a secure, trusted supply chain in which to execute. And the role of standards here is, if I'm logging into one large brand, maybe it's where I do my shopping, maybe it's the shoes that I appreciate, or the direct-to-consumer brand of, name one that you like. If I'm providing a login or an email, and then I get my news or my content in some other, within a traditional publisher, I, as a consumer, should be able to connect those two and authorize them to work through third parties, so that I can start to tailor the advertising with the brands that I trust. And we want to execute this through third parties while ensuring responsible use of consumer-provided identifiers, and without enabling rampant third-party tracking. Again, we don't see this. We'd like to try to figure out how to do this without a universal identifier, because the privacy engineers within the operating systems and the browsers, if they see a universal identifier, they will identify that and view that as a threat vector for privacy. So we have to really think about how we do this that can stand up to the scrutiny of the privacy advocates and the privacy engineers. This is a global effort. It involves all of us working together, not only from the business, technical, and policy folks, but across all stakeholders as well: publishers, marketers, consumers, platforms. And that's really difficult when we're working at global scale, and acknowledging and encouraging local groups to form for discussion and helping develop requirements and considerations on all these different areas. So we've devised a way to go about this, where we have a Project Rearc task force that is designed to bring in the inputs and the considerations from not just members, but more importantly, non-member organizations, because we all have a seat at this table, and we want to encourage local groups to form, such as IAB Australia, IAB New Zealand, IAB Southeast Asia, and India, IAB China, the IAB Japan organizations, and more, WFA, etc. They will all have local working groups and committees to discuss these aspects, and we want to encourage that and bring this back into the fold where we share this on a global basis, learn from each other, recognize uniformity across use cases, but also distinctive use cases that is tailored to regional preferences or regional requirements and considerations. Tech Lab will have technical working groups, just as it always does. It will take all of this global input, feed that into the very technically oriented working groups to develop the technical standards and guidelines. And we'll go through a process with Rearc as well. Phase 1 will be understanding the problem. Excuse me, we have big gaps in knowledge between all parties involved globally that we want to fill in to help understand the business impact and how everyone is really impacted on this. Then we'll go into phase 2 where we understand the technical alternatives available to us. We've done a lot of this work, so we'll share this and invite all the local groups to provide their feedback on this and embellish with their own considerations and comments. Then we'll go into the business and policy requirements that are going to be critical for the technical standards moving forward. So the webinars will be utilized all along the way because education is critical here. It's very important that we level set all companies in our ecosystem, all regions, all countries, all different stakeholders between the technology folks, the policy folks, the business folks. So we invite everyone to get involved, not only in these webinars, but also within the relevant task force and working groups involved. So how to participate? First of all, look to your local groups, the IAB groups specifically, as ways that you can get involved, provide feedback, provide your own perspectives, and they can then work with us to compile that and feed that into the standards process. We also invite you to be involved in the standards process. We don't want you to stop in one area. There's room for everybody within the Tech Lab working groups as well. It does get pretty technical though, I will warn you, and we'll taking in those inputs in from the business and policy groups. But the task force is a way for you can also get updates on where we are in this process. And we're starting those task force meetings either late next week or more likely the following week. And excuse me, we're working through the processes now for a project plan that we go through. We're pretty well time boxed in this, where we have to move pretty swiftly this year. We're aiming to get to tech standards, being ready to be developed into the core systems in Q4, to be launched and released in Q1 of 2021. So we're pretty well time boxed to move this forward. And I want to thank you for your participation. Here's where you go to get more information. Of course, please consult with Gay and JJ and their efforts and others within your local organizations. We very much appreciate your participation here. And now, before we go to questions, maybe I'll turn over if JJ or Gay want to make any comments.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jordan. That was brilliant. And yes, we will be sharing the decks with those that have participated, and the recording of the webinar will be available to members as well. Worry not. In terms of those working groups, just so you know, the global group I would recommend everyone signing up to, and then IAB Australia will be involved directly in the 2 technical working groups and liaising with the relevant councils internally, being the Exec Tech Council and also the Data Council. So just so you know, and we've updated all those groups accordingly. Okay, in terms of a few questions, there's a couple that we can answer fairly quickly, I think. I mean, the option of utilizing, someone's asked about decentralized IDs via blockchain. So whatever the mechanism is, I mean, there is a very large working group blockchain. I think at last count is about 300 members. And Jordan, I think you want to answer that one.
Yeah, we're definitely looking at blockchain. Blockchain is a technology means. So we're first looking at what are the requirements that we're solving for. A blockchain is where you can write different information. If you have ways of going forward and encrypting this and really locking down these mechanisms and information sharing that could or could not use blockchain. And so we'll certainly be looking at all of these and look forward to providing more feedback on specifics. But the ideas of what blockchain allows for is something that we're looking at very seriously. And I don't know if it would be first step, but we're trending definitely in that direction. Another question from VJ is, do you see using first-party cookies that, will they limit the reach and customization? Very clearly. This is going to limit the reach and customization of targeting. Any mechanisms that we use going forward carries with it that threat of reduced reach and customization. And what does that do if you're an advertiser? You want scale. And what we'd like to work together towards is supporting an open web where, and this is what the advertising community wants as well, because the alternative is they go to the very largest first parties and shift their spend that way. We want to give them a reason to keep their spend within the open web of publishers. So we're looking at mechanisms to enable that very clearly as going forward. Let's see. One question from Dave Goodfellow. How are existing Tech Lab identity initiatives like IFA or data transparency currently feeding into Rearc? We think they feed into, truthfully, Rearc is such an opportunity to galvanize our whole industry because it is so foundational to it that IFA identity for advertisers within a CTV environment, this obviously will feed directly into Rearc. Data transparency and data label, data taxonomy efforts of the content taxonomy, all of these things include even some of the brand safety and ad fraud mechanisms that we deploy today or that we have available. We see these as opportunities. Well, we'll look to them as ways that we can bring these together to solve multiple problems with one solution. And so we're going to be mindful of that. We're also mindful, particularly given today's economic situation, that excuse me, we have limited bandwidth from engineering teams today. So we're going to be looking for, okay, engineering teams, here is how we move forward. And this, to use a quote or use a term, we think we'll kill 3 birds with 1 stone if we go forward with this one solution. So we're looking for opportunities to bundle some of these together to solve the identity problem and a couple others at the same time with one engineering go-to-market effort. It's ambitious, it's idealistic, but we see some daylight there that we'll be looking at very closely and discussing within both the task force and the technical working groups. Nikki Banerjee is asking a question. Do you recommend for companies to join both the task force at a global level and at a local level in each market? What we're recommending is that, and we've already provided guidance to the IABs, we're recommending that the IABs use this as a mechanism to engage locally. There'll be cases where, like for example, measurement and attribution. Those are global use cases where we don't expect to see a lot of fragmented approaches or fragmented needs. Those are going to be pretty uniform needs across the globe, but privacy and policy, those are going to be localized. So we definitely are going to want local perspective, and we would recommend that you engage locally first and foremost. Of course, you're always welcome to join the task force. You'll get updates on that front as well. But this is a great opportunity for you to link arms locally, and Gay and JJ and all the other IABs globally will be providing updates and engaging, and there'll be opportunities for opinion pieces to get engaged and promote your own companies locally as well.
Jordan, we've probably got time for one more, I think. That's about it.
Yeah, can we just reiterate on that point that as mentioned, the member companies will be sitting and involved through IAB Australia and a couple of the technical working groups, and everyone else interested should sign up to that global task force just so as to get specific updates. We'll also be following up with another Rearc identity and privacy sandbox related webinar in mid-May, probably May 14th, just so you know.
And we'll also be working with all the other trade bodies, making sure that we have a lot in common with the marketers. We've got a lot of agencies in this group, but there'll be a lot of liaison with other business groups as well.
I'm going to try to answer 2 or 3 questions with one here. I see, will DMPs survive this wave? And similarly, what are your view on companies that are creating their own identity solutions, and generally thinking the role of different companies' platforms in this? And I do see a future for platforms. I think if we're not acting quickly and responsibly, we are going to see a winding back of the clock, unfortunately, 20 years. So it's really on us as an industry to move forward with solutions, and we can have the marketing automation, and we can have connect in these ways and offer these. I think the DMPs, the SSPs, the DSPs, all can survive. What they're going to need to do is to work with us on this, and as we develop new tech standards and guidelines for the use of identifiers and for how measurement and attribution gets done, they will need to build these new capabilities within their UIs, within their systems. And if they all do it roughly the same way, then we can leverage the benefit of standards to make sure everybody sees things the same way. But with standards at the very core level, they can all innovate with new features on top of those base standards, the way it ought to be done. And there's a lot of companies that are out front of this with really good mechanisms for identity, for managing this, that we're paying attention to, and we think can form foundations for thinking around this. They're getting involved, and they're saying, here's where we think standards ought to be, and this is how it should be. We want to develop the Wi-Fi that allow everyone to innovate on top of it and move the industry forward. And with that, thank you so much. I really appreciate you tuning in, and I hope everyone is very safe. And over to you, Gay.
Thanks, Jordan. And Jordan, you sound like you're getting a bit croaky. This is the third one of these you've done in a week. So thank you.
I've been talking all day.
Look, thanks for everyone for tuning in. I'm incredibly excited that we get to be part of really rebuilding our industry in a great way. The next webinar that we've got from Australia is some local research, so hopefully you'll all sign up for that. Next Thursday, we'll be presenting our own local direct brands research. So some really useful information, particularly in this time as many companies are embracing or further embracing e-commerce. So thank you all.